I want to move over to the Middle East. Right now, you're looking at a live image pointed toward southern Gaza. We've been following breaking news out of Gaza so closely as that ceasefire has been in effect for nearly a month at this point, but there's so many other headlines from around the region that are worth covering as well. Not all of them get talked about often. That's why we bring on guests like Dr. Alon Burstein to help us break down the latest in the Middle East, not only in Gaza. We will be getting to Gaza, Alon. But first, I want to ask you about something that we saw in the Wall Street Journal earlier this evening. This is an interesting one, to say the least. So this was an exclusive they had saying that Israel is considering significant strikes on Iranian nuclear sites this year, aiming to take advantage of the degradation of Iran's capabilities over the past year. The Wall Street Journal says all evidence indicates that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. We all know that. But what do we know about what's at these sites? Alone, do we know?
It's good to see you, Austin. Look, the debate about whether or not Israel is going to carry out an attack on Iran's nuclear sites has been, in the air in the Middle East for well over a decade. Israel has constantly said no matter what, it is not going to let Iran get nuclear weapons. Now, Iran knows this and has been scared of this, and Israel is not just making an idle threat. Israel did carry out a strike against Iraqi nuclear sites in 1981 and carried out strikes against Syrian nuclear sites in 2008. Israel has made good on its threats in the past. Iran, however, in preparation for this, has buried its nuclear sites deep into mountains. It has very sophisticated air defense capabilities. It has spread them across the country. So Iran is very prepared for this. The big change over the last year and a half of this war is that Iran has lost a lot of its ability to sort of activate the rest of the Middle East. We have seen Iran lose its main proxy, Hezbollah, at least the main crux of its strength in Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, and I know we're going to talk about that later possibly. We also saw the fall of the Assad regime, another arena which Iran would use to activate its proxies. The Houthis in Yemen are no longer a surprise proxy. They're no longer something that Iran can at any point say, okay, we are now asking the Houthis to start firing at Israel, and have that be something that Israel was not prepared for. And of course, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. Iran has not only lost all of those things, or the element of surprise at least, with all of those things throughout the war. Iran and Israel also, for the first time in this war, have already attacked each other. And in each of Israel's attacks, and you and I were speaking live throughout most of Israel's attacks in Iran, in each one of those attacks, Israel very, very methodically took out Iran's air defense capabilities. The attacks were symbolic against weapons developing, manufacturing sites, etc. But each and every time, the attacks took out the SA-300s, SA-400s, the Russian anti-air defense capabilities that Iran has. That was not only a message. It was not only a message to Iran saying that, we have the capability to do that. It was also laying the groundwork. That groundwork, I think Israel is hoping, is going to be something that maybe U.S. President Trump will authorize. But one more thing I'll say about this, it's not coincidence that the Wall Street Journal is publishing this now. This comes several days after President Trump has said that, of course, he would rather have a deal with Iran, but if a deal isn't possible, then, all bets are off and we'll see what happens. It's not coincidence that several days later it's being published. Israel is considering its own strike on Iran. This is part of Israel joining President Trump's pressure in hopes of bringing Iran to a deal. I think that's a more likely outcome of this, rather than actually seeing Israel carrying out an attack.
Not uncommon to negotiate in public. Let's talk about Gaza, Alone. It's been nearly a month since a ceasefire deal was reached between Hamas and Israel. Since the beginning, you and I have talked about the fragility of this deal, and this week it seems more fragile than ever. Hamas has accused Israel of violating the terms of the deal, and it said that it would suspend the planned handover of hostages this coming Saturday. Reuters says that Israel has called up military reservists in order to brace for a possible re-eruption of war in Gaza. So, Alon, as we sit here on Wednesday night in the U.S., how likely does a re-eruption of war actually feel?
So it's really changed a lot in the last 48 hours. When Hamas put out this announcement on Monday, I was asked by several different people, and I also put out my own video discussing this, and I said, this looks more like flexing muscles. All indications are that Hamas does not want to blow up the deal. Hamas laid out three main grievances against Israel. Two of them were either not true or things that Israel could very easily refute. One was a more legitimate grievance, so to speak, that Israel had not transferred any of the 60,000 mobile homes that were supposed to be transferred into the Gaza Strip. Israel said, again, also from its perspective, legitimately, well, there was no timetable for that. It's just supposed to happen during the first phase of the deal. That is not something that Hamas would break the deal over. In addition to that, the fact that Hamas made this announcement on Monday and the next hostage release was supposed to be on Saturday is another indication Hamas didn't want to blow up the deal. All they were going to do is lose days of humanitarian aid coming in. They really were just flexing their muscles and wanted the different negotiating parties, chief among them Qatar and Egypt, to sort of chime in and force Israel to adhere to what Hamas is demanding. However, what Hamas did probably not factor in was going to be US President Trump's response, all of a sudden calling in a new ultimatum saying that all hostages, not just the next three, and he repeated this several times, all hostages have to come back by Saturday at noon, was a game changer. And it was a game changer, ironically, because it put Israel under pressure. Within Israel and the Israeli government, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had sort of sold the deal to his hawkish cabinet by saying, look, it is true that we are going to a ceasefire and a hostage deal, which a lot of my government is not in favor of. But we have to do this because the Trump administration is pressuring us to do this. And also, we have Trump's plan for Gaza. So just go along with me. Now, all of a sudden, Trump is saying something different. All of a sudden, he's saying if all the hostages don't come back, then, as far as I'm concerned, deals off, go to war. And Israel's now in a bind almost. Since then, since Hamas's announcement, Hamas recognized that now Israel's in a bind, and Hamas has scaled back. We had today Sami Abu Zuhairi, one of the top leaders of Hamas, saying that the group has negotiated with Egypt and it would be willing to still adhere to the deal. They've already announced they are likely going to release three more hostages on Saturday as planned. Now Israel has a question. Does Israel accept the release of three more hostages as part of the deal? That's what was supposed to happen. Or is Israel going to capitalize on what Trump said and said, okay, this is now our opportunity. If all the hostages don't come back, we are sort of going to break the bank and walk away. One more thing that's just very important to say, Hamas, while it did not say this is one of its main grievances, Hamas is very nervous about phase two of the deal. Israel, according to the deal, was supposed to start negotiating about phase two already on day 16. That's already a week ago. And phase two is the complete idea of withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And the United States was supposed to pressure Israel to do that. The United States did not pressure Israel to do that. In fact, the press conference of Netanyahu and Trump was that very evening or the day after. So meanwhile, Hamas is saying, okay, the United States is not pressuring Israel to move on to the larger deal of a ceasefire. That is one of the things that Hamas really wanted the negotiating parties to pressure Israel into. Remains to be seen if that's actually going to happen.
You talk about Trump's proposal for the future of Gaza. Let's talk a bit about this. All of this concern over the truce breaking down is, of course, coming as frustration is mounting, Alon, in the Arab world over Trump's claims that he wants the U.S. to take over Gaza and resettle its Palestinian inhabitants. There's also been some reporting out there of Egypt having its own proposal to rebuild the Gaza Strip within 3 to 5 years, though there's no mention of a plan on their side to work with the Trump administration, according to I-24. Is this a precursor of what's to come in the years ahead, Alone? Will there be a lot of grappling over how to rebuild Gaza and who will get it done?
Very much. I think Trump's plan was, part of his common strategy of, first coming off with, 25%, 50% tariffs, and then possibly coming to negotiate. And that is largely what we're seeing happening within the Arab world. Egypt has developed a plan, and they've presented some of it. They said they're going to present the rest of it next week. That is supposed to be a 3 to 5 year plan of a phased rebuilding of Gaza from the south to the north, but all this without uprooting the Palestinians. One of the things, though, that I think Trump did not factor in, different than the strong arm tactics with Colombia or possibly with Canada and Mexico with the tariffs and things like that, is that if the ceasefire does in fact break down here, then two things are going to be the result of his statements, even if he never intended to actually follow them through. One is that within Israel, this is not being taken simply as a negotiating tactic. It's actually being taken quite seriously. There are already laws being proposed about how Israel should encourage the willful immigration, so to speak, of Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. Others are called ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. So that is one thing that even if Trump did not intend for this actually to happen, was more a tactic to get Egypt, Jordan, Qatar to chime in, it's being taken seriously in Israel. Another thing that has to be taken into consideration, up until now, large parts of the world were hoping that there will be some sort of Palestinian uprising against Hamas, that Palestinians will go back and see the devastation in the Gaza Strip, see what Hamas brought to them with this war, and the Palestinians themselves will say, okay, we don't want this endless war. Right now, though, what Palestinians are being faced with, what Hamas is presenting to them is like, look, either you help us join the fight and fight Israel, or what's waiting for you is, according to the statements that are being made by Israel and the United States, what's waiting for you is Israel takes over, hands us over to Gaza, and you are ethnically cleansed from the region. If fighting does resume, it is actually going to be a lot easier for Hamas to recruit more members in the Gaza Strip now that it's not, nothing's being presented to them as a possible alternative other than forced evacuation from the area. So even if Trump was not fully intending for this plan to go through, it is actually going to have an effect on the ground, both in Israel and in Gaza as things go forward.
One more thing before we go. You were mentioning this to me offline. This is something we haven't talked about in a long time. The ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah was front and center of our discussions alone for so long, but now it's almost easy to forget that that ceasefire has been in place now for about 2.5 months. Before we go tonight, what's been going on up there in Lebanon as of late? Where does the ceasefire up there go at this point?
So one of the things that really, this is an arena that people have forgotten about, but really could reignite itself. The deal between Israel and Lebanon, and that's important. Hezbollah was actually not a party to the deal. The deal between Israel and Lebanon was that Israel will stay in southern Lebanon. The IDF will stay in southern Lebanon for 60 days. There will be a transition period. The Lebanese military will deploy in southern Lebanon and will purify the area, so to speak, from Hezbollah. Since then, 60 days passed. The Lebanese military did deploy, but not nearly as much as it was supposed to. And as a result, there was an extension of several weeks of the ceasefire, and the IDF was going to remain in southern Lebanon until this coming Tuesday, until February 18th. At that point, the IDF is supposed to withdraw. At this present time, the IDF is saying, look, we're seeing that Hezbollah units are starting to pick up their heads in southern Lebanon, not necessarily with weapons, but they're starting to rebuild the infrastructure and take up the lookout posts. And there's concern that the Lebanese military is not engaging them as actively as it should. And therefore, the IDF has said that it is not going to fully withdraw. It wants to hold on to 5 specific locations in southern Lebanon that are very strategic, that are hilly areas that sort of overlook southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Lebanese newly elected president, the newly elected president said that he does not agree to this. There's been conflicting reports if the United States is going to back Israel on this or not. Chances are we're not going to see a complete breakdown of the ceasefire on Tuesday, but we are seeing the patience of both sides starting to run out. Israel saying the Lebanese military is not doing what it should do, and Lebanon saying we're now 2 weeks past the deadline that already was missed. Israel needs to withdraw. So tensions are starting to rise in that arena as well.
All right, Alon, as always, so much to follow, so much to cover. We always appreciate you. Alon does upload his own recaps of the Middle East on his personal YouTube channel. Good to see you. Talk soon.